Hi everyone, Miss Hart here. Today we're going to be discussing Europe before Columbus's voyages of exploration to provide us with some context for understanding this momentous event that literally changed the world as we know it. When Columbus's ships arrive in the Caribbean, this is going to result in a biological and cultural exchange, the likes of which the world has never seen again. Columbus's voyages are going to unleash an age of conquest and Western hegemony, as well as resulting in the deaths of millions of indigenous Americans, primarily due to diseases like smallpox, and create the first truly global economy, which will be fueled by silver mined in the Americas and lay the foundations for what will eventually become the United States of America. But before we get too much into that, I thought it was important to give you a little context. Context is extremely important whenever we're trying to analyze an event or a development. Without context, we're really limited in our analysis. Contextualization really allows us to weave a rich and dynamic portrait of a historical event rather than just a superficial understanding. So remember, context is key. Whenever I'm trying to figure out the context of an event, I ask myself a very simple question. Where did the story really begin? And the story of European exploration doesn't begin in 1492 with Columbus's arrival in the Caribbean. Rather, the story of European exploration really begins with some key events of the late 14th and early 15th centuries. Until the late 1400s, indigenous Americans and Europeans had no knowledge that the other even existed. While Scandinavian Vikings had visited and explored Greenland and Nova Scotia around 1000 CE, these voyages didn't really have any lasting impact. By contrast, Columbus's fateful voyage in 1492 brought into contact two hemispheres of people, plants, animals, and diseases. Ultimately, the arrival of Europeans in 1492 was made possible by some key developments in the 15th century. In the 15th century, Europe was undergoing profound changes politically, economically, technologically, and culturally. The last 2 years of European history saw a huge commercial revival. No longer was trade limited and local. You can see here in this map that trade really starts to revive right around the 1000 and CE, and by the 1200s, we're kind of seeing like definitely the revival of regional trade. No longer is Europe going to be based on the manorial system or feudalism, where all economic activity is on the manor and there's very limited trade. Now, by the 1200s, trade has revived, and Europeans are really kind of starting to venture back out of their shells again, once again. By the 13th and 14th centuries, trade was long distance and much more intense. In particular, Europeans were trading quite extensively with the merchants of the Middle East, who supplied Europe's markets with Asian luxury goods like pepper. It was all about the pepper trade, okay, which was quite profitable. And Europeans really had a taste for goods like pepper that could only be produced in the climate and terrain of South and East Asia. Consequently, merchants operating in the Middle East were poised ideally to act as the go-betweens between Europe and the Far East. Perhaps one of the most popular places for European merchants to acquire these sought-after luxury goods was Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. Access to Constantinople was key. Its status as a Christian-controlled city, albeit one that was quite diverse, and its key strategic location made it absolutely essential for European merchants to fulfill the demand for foreign luxury goods like pepper. That's why the conquest of Constantinople in 1453 by the Ottoman Turks was such an important factor in European exploration later on in the late 15th century. When the Ottomans finally conquer Constantinople, the last Christian connection in the Middle East was severed. This is going to cut off a lot of European merchants from the trade routes that they had relied on to supply European markets. The Ottomans are still going to trade, but pretty much exclusively with the city of Venice on the Italian peninsula. And this monopoly is going to motivate Europeans to start looking for alternate trade routes to Asia. Another key development in the 15th century that is going to make European exploration possible is the political centralization of European nation states. 15th century monarchies like those in Portugal and Spain are going to consolidate their power in the 15th century, and as a result are going to be able to mobilize resources to fund voyages of exploration. It's really only the state that has the funds necessary to acquire the new technology, to build the ships, and to pay for these long ocean voyages. First, it's the Portuguese state, specifically Prince Henry, also known as Prince Henry, the quote-unquote navigator, is going to set up a school of navigation, bringing together the best minds of Europe and beyond to improve on pre-existing technology like the compass, the astrolabe, the armillary sphere, as well as to develop better maps and ship designs like the caravel. This school and the subsequent voyages, Portuguese voyages around Africa by Bartholomew Dias and Vasco da Gama, were only possible because they were sponsored and funded by the Portuguese monarchy. It's also no coincidence that the year 1492 not only saw the conquest of the last Muslim stronghold in southern Spain by Ferdinand and Isabella, as well as their sponsorship of Columbus's voyages of exploration. It's because Ferdinand and Isabel had unified Spain, expelling the last Muslim stronghold in Granada in 1492, that they had kind of like the resources to be able to like fund Columbus's voyages of exploration. So the first voyages of exploration by the Portuguese and then later the Spanish only occurred because of the perfect storm of political, economic, technological, and cultural changes that occurred throughout the entire course of the 15th century, culminating in Columbus's fateful voyage west in 1492. These initial voyages by Columbus are eventually going to result in a gold rush, so to speak, west in the 16th century as other European nation states like England, France, and the Dutch Republic are going to want to get in on the action. They recognize the untapped wealth open to them in this quote-unquote new world that the Americas represents for Europeans. The next time we meet in class, we're going to dig a little deeper into the causes of European exploration, the 3Gs, so to speak, as well as the nature of the first contact between Native Americans and Europeans. This first contact is going to fundamentally change the fate of North and South American continents and usher in really about a 400-year period of European hegemony that's going to go virtually unchecked until the 20th century. Well, that's all I have for you today. Remember that contextualization is an important historical thinking skill, and that understanding the context in which Columbus's voyages occurred is essential to our analysis of what happens next. See you tomorrow in class.